All right, so today we're going to dive into the book of Exodus.
Okay.
Specifically chapters 7.125.
All right.
So the beginning of the Moses story.
It is.
And let me tell you, it is a wild ride.
Oh, yeah.
We've got plagues, we've got power struggles,
For sure.
and some serious questions about free will.
Absolutely. It's a passage that really sets the stage, I think, for this entire Exodus narrative.
Right.
And I think you'll want to pay attention as we're talking to the sort of dynamics between Moses and Aaron and Pharaoh and God.
Right.
All of their interactions are key to understanding sort of how this drama unfolds.
Yeah, so let's picture this.
Yeah.
We're in Egypt, and this 80-year-old shepherd named Moses shows up and claims that God has chosen him to lead the Israelites out of slavery.
Talk about a late career change, right?
Right.
That's amazing. And what's fascinating is that God pairs Moses with his brother Aaron, who is 83, to be his spokesperson.
Wow.
It really highlights that God can use anyone, regardless of age or perceived weaknesses,
Right.
to accomplish his purposes.
It's like God saying, don't underestimate the power of experience.
Yeah, exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
God tells Moses that he will harden Pharaoh's heart.
Now that statement has sparked centuries of debate.
Right.
What does it mean for God to influence free will?
Right.
Some sources interpret it as God simply allowing Pharaoh's already stubborn nature to run its course.
So not necessarily forcing his hand, but letting him make his own choice, which would inevitably lead to resistance.
Exactly. But other sources suggest a more direct intervention, that God is actively influencing Pharaoh's decisions to ensure the events unfold according to his plan.
Okay, so it's a complex theological question.
Absolutely.
With no easy answers.
Right.
And it really makes you think about the tension between human agency and divine sovereignty.
For sure.
So let's get back to the story.
Okay.
We've got Moses and Aaron facing down Pharaoh,
Yeah.
and things are about to get supernatural.
Here we go.
Cue the special effects. It's time for the first miracle. Aaron throws down his staff and boom, it transforms into a snake.
Of course, the Egyptian magicians aren't impressed.
Of course not.
They pull the same trick, but then Aaron's staff swallows their staffs whole.
So I'm picturing this scene. Their staffs are just disappearing one by one.
Yeah.
It's such a power move by God.
Totally. It sets the stage for this contest of power.
Right.
With God consistently outmaneuvering the Egyptians.
Like God is saying, you think you're powerful, watch this.
Right?
And then comes the first plague. God turns the Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt, into blood.
Can you imagine the sheer terror?
Oh my.
The Nile was sacred to them, a source of life and sustenance.
Right.
Suddenly it's undrinkable, the fish are dying, and the stench is unbearable.
It's a very visceral image.
Yeah.
And it really highlights God's power over nature.
And even the water stored in containers is affected.
Oh, wow.
There's no escape.
But here's the thing. The Egyptian magicians somehow managed to replicate this miracle.
Right.
They turn water into blood, too.
Which raises some interesting questions.
Yeah.
Are they drawing on real magical powers? Or is it just a clever illusion?
Right.
And if they can mimic God's power, why doesn't it change Pharaoh's mind?
It's almost like their imitation just solidifies God's ultimate authority.
Sure.
Like, sure, you can copy me, but you can't match the real deal.
Exactly.
And as you might have guessed, Pharaoh remains defiant.
He does.
He witnesses this incredible display of power and still refuses to release the Israelites.
Yeah. It's like he's digging his heels in deeper with every miracle.
So we're left wondering, will anything break through Pharaoh's stubbornness?
Right.
What will it take for him to finally acknowledge God's power and let his people go?
Yeah, good questions.
So Pharaoh's seen the Nile turn to blood,
He has.
but he's still not budging.
Nope.
It's like watching someone refuse to admit they're wrong, even when the evidence is right there in front of them.
Yeah, that's the thing about power.
Yeah.
Sometimes the more you cling to it, the harder it is to see beyond your own perspective. And in Pharaoh's case, his grip on power is about to be challenged in some truly unforgettable ways.
You're talking about the plagues, right? Because the Nile turning to blood was just the beginning.
Exactly. And the thing is, the plagues don't just escalate in intensity. They also target very specific aspects of Egyptian life and their understanding of the world.
Okay.
It's like God is dismantling their sense of order and security piece by piece.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these plagues.
Right.
Up next, we've got the plague of frogs.
Imagine this. You're in Egypt and suddenly frogs are everywhere.
Oh.
Not just in the fields and rivers, but in your homes, your beds, your cooking pots.
Oh my gosh.
It would be utter chaos.
And to make matters worse, Even Pharaoh's magicians can duplicate this plague.
Right.
They're conjuring up even more frogs.
Which is interesting because it shows they have some power.
Right.
But ultimately, they're making things worse.
Yeah.
It's like they're proving God's point that only he has true control over nature.
But even with frogs hopping all over the palace, Pharaoh's heart remains hardened.
It does.
He only agrees to let the Israelites go when the stench of the dying frogs becomes unbearable.
Right.
And even then he tries to bargain with Moses, saying they can only go a little way.
It's like he's trying to maintain some semblance of control even while being overwhelmed. And this pattern repeats itself with the next plague, gnats.
Gnats.
Imagine the air thick with these tiny insects making it impossible to breathe or see this time. Even the magicians can't replicate it.
Oh, really?
They admit this is the finger of God.
Wait, so even they recognize they're dealing with something beyond their power?
Exactly. They finally see that there's a force at work that even their magic can't control.
Okay.
And it's a pivotal moment because it challenges the foundation of their belief system. They're being forced to confront the reality of a power greater than their own.
But of course, Pharaoh doesn't change his mind. At least not completely.
Right.
He's still clinging to power.
Yeah.
Still trying to dictate the terms of the Israelites' release.
And that's what makes this story so compelling. It's not just a series of spectacular events. It's a psychological drama, a battle of wills between a stubborn king and a God who's determined to liberate his people.
So as we move into the next set of plagues,
Yeah.
keep that tension in mind, because things are about to get even more intense. So we've seen God turn the Nile to blood, unleash swarms of frogs and gnats.
We have.
But Pharaoh is still holding on to power. It makes you wonder, what will it take to finally break through his stubbornness?
Well, the next wave of plagues really ups the ante. We move from these sort of general disturbances to things that strike at the heart of Egyptian society, their economy, their beliefs, even their physical bodies.
Okay, so walk me through this. What comes next?
The fourth plague targets livestock. You have to remember, in ancient Egypt, animals weren't just food. They were intertwined with their economy and even their religion.
So this isn't just a loss of property. It's shaking the foundations of their world.
Precisely. And then the fifth plague is boils, painful sores that afflict both people and animals. Even the magicians who've been trying to counter God's power are struck down.
Wow, so it's like this power is so immense, it bypasses any attempts to control or contain it.
Exactly. Now, each plague brings a moment where Pharaoh seems to waver. Like with the hail, the text describes him as terrified, even admitting that he's sinned.
But does he truly change his mind?
That's the tragic pattern. The plague ends, relief comes, and Pharaoh hardens his heart again. It's a cycle of temporary fear followed by stubborn defiance.
So are we meant to see Pharaoh as just a villain in this story?
It's more nuanced than that. Some sources suggest he's a tragic figure trapped by his own pride and the expectations of his position. He's almost a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power.
That's a good point. It's easy to judge, but imagine the pressure he's under with advisors telling him to stand firm.
Exactly. And then comes perhaps the most visually striking plague, locusts. Imagine the sky darkening, this massive swarm descending, devouring every green plant in sight. It's a picture of utter devastation.
This time, even Pharaoh's advisors are begging him to relent, saying Egypt will be ruined, but he still hesitates.
It's only when the locusts are already stripping the land bare that he finally agrees to let the Israelites go. But as with the previous plagues, once the crisis passes, he backtracks on his promise.
So we're left with this final terrifying plague darkness. Not just night, but a thick, palpable darkness that covers the land for 3 days.
It's a powerful symbol representing the spiritual darkness that comes from resisting God. It evokes this sense of isolation, fear the unknown.
Even in this darkness, Pharaoh tries to negotiate. He'll let the Israelites go, but they can't take their livestock. He's still grasping for some control.
But Moses stands firm. They need their livestock for their journey and for sacrifices to God. This isn't just about freedom. It's about the freedom to worship as they choose.
And that leads us to the 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn. It's a chilling moment, one that underscores the tragic consequences of prolonged defiance.
It's a plague that finally breaks Pharaoh's resistance. He realizes the cost of his stubbornness, the terrible price that's been paid.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listener?
I think this passage challenges us to examine our own hearts. Are we clinging to control, resisting change, even when it's clear a new path is needed?
And it also prompts us to consider the nature of power. Who or what are we ultimately surrendering to? Is it our own ego, our fears, or something greater than ourselves?
And finally, this story reminds us that freedom is a precious gift. one that often comes at a cost. It's not just about physical liberation, but also the freedom to live in accordance with our values, to worship without constraint, and to embrace a life of purpose and meaning.
So as you continue exploring the book of Exodus, remember the lessons of these plagues. Let them challenge your assumptions, inspire you to seek deeper truth, and empower you to embrace a life of courage and conviction.